Hi everyone, we're going to get started with today's session on problem discovery and systems thinking. You guys do not have to listen to hear me talk again this week, so I'm very excited to welcome our speaker, Rosalynn. Rosalynn, driven by passion about the power of business to solve massive global problems, Rosalynn works with companies, entrepreneurs, and students to help them develop their capacity to create economic innovation and growth while maintaining strong social and environmental commitments. Her background is in entrepreneurship and innovation with the Bachelor of Commerce from the Haskayne School of Business and an Executive Master's of Sustainability and Leadership from Arizona State University. She's been involved in 5 different startups in numerous different capacities as the owner-founder, board member, and employee. Rosalynn is a lifelong learner and takes every opportunity to develop knowledge and leadership in the areas of sustainability, leadership, and innovation. Growing up in a rural area outside of Calgary, she loves the outdoors, the mountains, and travel adventures in her free time. You can find her spending time with her family and her horses. Welcome, Rosalynn.
Thank you very much. Well, good evening, everyone. Thanks so much for having me here today. I'm excited to talk about this with you. I will be honest, the timing for this is going to be a little bit of an experiment. These are topics that I'm familiar with and things that I really like to talk about and engage with, but I've kind of pulled 3 different fairly major topics together into 1 hour-long presentation. So apologies in advance if it feels a little bit like drinking from a fire hose, but I've tried to just bring a couple of these different topics together to identify or fill in some of these problem discovery and systems thinking type activities for you for today. So I think that, the learning objectives that were suggested for this evening are really looking at, how to identify problems, how to learn from your customers, how to create that problem statement and figure out what you're actually trying to solve, and then really trying to understand how that problem fits into a larger system and the implications of that. And so as I see it, this is the mishmash, or the coming together, I should say, that's a much better way of saying it, of entrepreneurial thinking, design thinking, and systems thinking. And so I'm an instructor over in Haskayne, and so I teach entrepreneurial thinking every single day, and then I get to teach some design thinking and systems thinking in some of my other classes fairly often as well. So there's lots of tools that I'm aware of. If there are things after today that you'd like to know more about, because as I say, we're going to go super, pretty shallow into some fairly big conversations, but hopefully give you some ideas, places to start, actionable things for you to be able to make use of as you continue on your Launchpad journey. So I know that you have had a conversation about entrepreneurial thinking and what it is. I think it's a great place to start again for today, though, in terms of what it is that we're talking about. So entrepreneurial versus managerial thinking is really one of the best ways of being able to describe the differences. So both of these are approaches to problem solving. Both of these are skill sets that can be developed, and both of these are really important. If you've spent any time on the UCalgary campus, which I assume you do, you'll know that the university has a really strong push for entrepreneurial thinking across the campus and in all things. And so the reason for that is that we often get a lot more practice in managerial thinking than we do typically in entrepreneurial thinking. And so managerial thinking is when you start with some given means, some given resources. You really, you know what you have available to you, and ultimately you know what you're going to create at the end of it, right? You have a predetermined end. So you know where you're going, you know how to get there, and you know how, you'll know when you get there, and you know how to get there. Sometimes there's be some questions, some, creativity along the way, but ultimately you kind of know once you've arrived. On the other hand, entrepreneurial thinking tends to be even more creative than that, right? You're starting with some resources, but maybe not enough. Not enough time, not enough money, not enough information, all of those different sort of things, but you have to start anyways. And so in that case, you come up with multiple different outcomes, right? You try different things, you brainstorm, you come up with lots of options, and then start to work through those to see what's going to work best for you. And so we're really, really good at entrepreneurial thinking and that creative thinking when we're kids, right? I have a 5-year-old son who does this all the time. It is remarkable. We, however, go through life and start to get, some of our curiosity, some of the questions, and a lot of our creativity kind of taught out of us. So the opportunity to start practicing this again and bringing it back into what you're doing and how you're approaching life is a really valuable thing, and obviously something I don't need to convince you of, given that you're all in this program. But I think, again, just a useful place to be able to frame what we're talking about. So when we're talking about entrepreneurial thinking, we're talking about things that maybe haven't been done before. We're talking about doing things in ways that they haven't been done before. We're talking about solving new problems. We're talking about involving new groups of people. And so really important to have some tools to be able to work through this. So, some other examples. Managerial thinking, you get a box of Lego, you get some instructions, you know exactly what to do, you know when you're done, you followed the process. It is fun, it is enjoyable, it's useful, worthwhile skills, and it's different from, here's a whole bunch of Lego, go build something, right? Sometimes I find that when we talk and really want to start with identifying a problem, for some people that feels a little bit negative, right? Like, these kids aren't solving a problem right now, they're having the time of their lives. But at the same time, if we frame it as problem solving, it helps us to understand and frame the rest of the conversation. So when we just go do something, try something, that's really more that entrepreneurial thinking type approach. Now, entrepreneurial thinking really is just another way of saying problem solving with limited available means, right? And that being those limited resources, time, money, information, etc. And so if we think about it that way, if we think about wanting to solve problems in all sorts of different ways, then that helps us to recognize the opportunity and the need to start with identifying problems. So a few things that I think are really important that I hear all the time, whether this is, listening to people pitch, listening to investors give feedback, listening to, advisors give advice to new startups or experienced entrepreneurs, is it really need to focus on the problem, not the solution, right? Not the product that you are offering. Because there are all sorts of wild, crazy solutions out there, but if they don't actually solve a problem, then, they often don't necessarily get anywhere, right? So Google Glass might have just been way ahead of its time, but really that was a super cool thing, right? This was an awesome product. It was a really cool solution. But it didn't really have a problem to solve, right? It was just kind of an innovative thing that never really got off the ground. The Oakley glasses with the earbuds in them, not really solving a problem, right? Fitting people's heads, being able to work properly. There's some challenges that go along with that. So, what problem was being solved? Probably created more problems. The seat crutch thing. Yeah, wouldn't that be great to carry a seat around with you and be able to sit down wherever you are? Except for all of that time that you're carrying it around with you. The Segway is a very famous example of something that was, this cool, fabulous invention, really neat, super exciting use of creativity and technology. But again, what problem was it solving? Well, it turned out it was actually dangerous. It was disallowed on sidewalks. The guy who invented it drove himself off a cliff driving it, right? There's challenges with it, and it never really got the traction that people thought it would because it was a cool solution. And then the last one I think is just kind of hilarious, right? We're solving a very particular problem here in this, in terms of people who have earrings and also want their earplugs with them at all times. How often does that happen? How big is our market? It's hard to say. So rather than starting with your problem or your product, or starting with your solution, anytime that you're thinking about this idea, anytime you're talking to anyone about it, always challenge yourself to start with the problem that you're trying to solve, not the solution that you're putting out to the world. This is really important because it allows you to be a lot more flexible than you might otherwise be. If you are totally committed to your Segway or your Google Glass or your Oakley earphone, then you are much less likely to hear feedback, take feedback, and be able to pivot to new ideas. Right? If you are super committed to solving a problem, how you solve it doesn't actually matter. If you're super committed to selling a product, the chances of success just go way down. Entrepreneurship and entrepreneurial thinking so much is about iteration, about pivoting, and about changing on the basis of feedback. And so if you're focused on the solution and not the problem, that becomes way harder to be able to do. The other thing that I think is really important to start with is to focus and make sure that you're talking about problems and not symptoms, right? This is a simple thing, a simple mistake to be able to make, and we do it all the time. But if we think about when we have a cold, what can we do about it? Well, we blow our nose, we can take medicine, we can, have tea, we can rest. But none of those actually prevent the cold. None of those actually get rid of the cold, right? I still have the cold, I'm dealing with the symptoms. So if we can work to the root cause of that cold, why did it happen in the first place? Do we have this? How can we prevent it? If we could figure out how to make people never get colds again, one, that's a remarkable solution, but two, makes pretty much all of these others completely obsolete. So really being able to get to the root cause of things. And I'll give you some tips and tools to be able to do that a little bit later on. So I know that many of you, maybe all of you in the program have a problem, have an idea, have something that you're working on. But being able to just step back and, if you're maybe at the point where actually I kind of feel like I have a solution, maybe not the problem, how do you actually go back and start to think about what that problem might actually be? So, this goes back to what I was saying just a minute ago in terms of we get creativity and curiosity taught out of us. So trying to be curious, embrace your inner 5-year-old, your inner preschooler, and ask why a lot, right? Ask why all the time. Why is it like that? Why do we do it that way? Why can't this be better or faster or cheaper? Why can't that solution that's, fixing that thing over there, be solved over here? Why aren't we doing better with this? The other thing too that I think is really valuable is despite having an idea that you're working on, keep a bug log, right? Keep a notebook with you or a file on your phone where you're jotting ideas down all the time. Ooh, that's a pain point. Oh, that's frustrating. Oh, I bet that could be made better or easier. Because when you start to look for these sorts of things, you get better and better at it, right? It's a practice. When you start to find and look for problems, it is something that your brain just starts to kind of automatically do in the background, right? We know that when we start thinking about red Toyota RAV4s, suddenly there's red Toyota RAV4s everywhere. Well, the number hasn't actually changed. Our brains are just kind of working in the background in terms of looking for those things. So if we cue our brains to say, hey, we're looking for problems, and we're going to jot those down and we're going to make note of those, then we start to just do this naturally. And then there's more and more of this sort of entrepreneurial mindset and thinking that comes into play throughout your days, right? And you can maybe build those into the ideas you're working on now. Maybe you save them for later, but it really gives you an interesting sort of approach and mindset to being able to solve these different pieces. Now, this is where we start to enter the design thinking aspect. And again, this is something that can be, entire courses. There's certifications and all sorts of things to be able to do with design thinking. But I think the most important and most relevant piece to problem solving is really recognizing that it is about your users. It is that human-centered approach to problem solving. And so what does that mean exactly? Well, IBM talks about it in terms of, being able to understand means solving problems and creating solutions by looking at the users and the experience, not the features. Right? So again, this is not saying, hey, I have this fabulous solution. It's got all these great features. It's going to be amazing. No, it's about looking at the user who is going to be using it, who suffers the problem, and what is their experience currently? What are they dealing with? What are they going through? What are they challenged with? What could be made better for them? Right? I think a really interesting example of this is MRI machines. Right? MRI machines have incredible features. They are technologically advanced. They're wonderful things. But if you're a child, an MRI machine is a really scary thing, right? It's noisy, it's claustrophobic, it's, you know something is wrong, but you probably don't know what is wrong. You have to wear special clothing. People are gonna put weird probes on you. You go into this tube by yourself and you're left in there for a while. That's terrifying, right? And so just that experience for that user kind of sucks. And so there's really simple ways to be able to shift that experience. And there's MRI machines that have been painted as spaceships and pirate ships and things like that. So just a small difference makes the experience a bit of an adventure, right? And so we don't have to do anything about the features or anything about the solution necessarily, but being able to really understand that experience a bit more. Design thinking is also a fabulous way to challenge your assumptions, because design thinking means going and talking to people. It doesn't mean sitting at home saying, I think I know what other people experience. I think I know what their problem is, right? It means going and actually understanding. It means going to look and observe, talk to, understand at a much deeper level what's actually going on. And so why use design thinking? Well, it's one of these ways that we can create this wonderful intersection between desirability, viability, and feasibility, right? Working through different design thinking processes can help us to understand, does the customer actually want it? Does it actually solve their problem, right? Again, going back to not just being committed to the solution, but does it solve their problem? Feasibility, can we actually do it? What does that look like? And then viability, should we do it? Will it actually work, right? Is it actually going to be, when we're thinking about entrepreneurial ventures, is there a business model that can come along with it? Is there revenue to be made? Can it pay for the efforts that we are putting into it? A few different approaches to design thinking are out there. There's all sorts of different ones. None are correct or incorrect, but kind of just different approaches. So Stanford has a very famous, very prolific design school, and this is the process that they work through. And so the first step is always empathize. It is always go and talk to the audience for whom you are designing, right? Try to take their perspective. Try to understand, what matters to them. What is the pain point that they are experiencing? Again, this isn't going to say, hey, do you want my solution? No, hey, what is the problem that you're experiencing? What is your frustration? What is the difficulty that you're dealing with? From there, you can define the problem statement, and we'll talk more about that in a minute. Then you can start to prototype and ideate, right? Come up with different brainstorming solutions. Then you can prototype those things and test them out in terms of understanding what people want, how that works, and that ultimately gives you more information in terms of how you can empathize further with that user. Another model is the double diamond for design thinking. And so this makes use of two different kinds of thinking, where first there's divergent, right? You're trying to come up with wild, crazy, different ideas. You're brainstorming, you're not judging, you're purposely coming up with all sorts of, different things. When we talk about discovery, right, that can be discovering your customers. This is going to talk to them, observe them, interview them, survey them, all of those different sort of things to be able to discover what is happening. Try to understand all of the different levels, all of the different ways that the problem is happening. How is it affecting people? Because from there, once you've got all of these different ideas and your divergent thinking, you start to converge and say, okay, which one of those specific problems are we going to focus on? We're going to define our problem statement. So again, similar steps there. Once we understand specifically what problem we're looking at, we're going to start to diverge and think about solutions. We brainstorm again, coming up with wild, crazy ideas and starting to develop what those might look like. As we work through that creative process, we can then at that point start to converge again on something that we will actually want to test and work through. We're not committing, we're not actually spending millions of dollars on our solution yet, but we're still just kind of iterating through this process. And so these are great tools to be able to understand, right? Going out to get empathy and take the perspective of your users. Because when you want to know what they're experiencing, the very best way to do that is by actually talking to them. So this just kind of reiterates what I've just been saying, is that design thinking really is about starting with empathy. It's starting with understanding your user. And so learning about the audience for whom you are creating. This can be qualitative or quantitative research. This can be simply observing people. This can be, immersing yourself in the experience that you're trying to understand more. It could be interviews, it could be workshops, it could be surveys. All sorts of different ways of making sure that you are, really understanding the problem. This is something that when I'm teaching entrepreneurial thinking, every single student, 400 of them this semester, are out doing interviews, doing multiple interviews with people to go and understand what is it that they're experiencing, and really starting with that and really challenging those assumptions, right? We can assume what people want or how they're experiencing the problem, but without actually going to talk to them, we don't get that same level of relevance or understanding. Okay, so we have started to problem identify, right? We've brainstormed a little bit. We've done a bug log maybe, got a problem. You've talked to your users a little bit. How do we actually get to that define point? How do we understand that problem statement specifically? How do we get to the root cause of that problem now that we've kind of understood this ecosystem, if you will, of different problems that are out there? A great way of being able to get to the root cause, to get down to, beyond those symptoms, deeper than those symptoms, is using something called the iceberg model. Now, this is both problem identification, but this is also a systems thinking tool that is really, really useful, and something that I think can be quite powerful. And so, as with all iceberg analogies, it holds here as well, right? We have the little bit of the iceberg above the water. That's kind of what you see, right? That's what we're typically noticing. It's the things that are most obvious, most tangible, and clear to us. But it's also such a small portion of what is actually going on, right? There's so much happening below the surface that is much less tangible, but also much more impactful. So it looks a bit like this. So we start with the event, and then the pattern, the underlying structure, and the mental models. And I'll go into what each one of these mean here in just a minute, but just want to be able to reiterate that as you go down each level, you get a deeper understanding of the problem or that system that you're looking at. It offers increasing leverage for changing it, right? If you can change mental models, that's way different than changing events. But it also becomes that much less tangible, right? Most tangible, least tangible, most obvious, least obvious, easiest to change, hardest to change, but most impactful if you can. So working through the iceberg model, event is simply what happened. That's easy to describe. It's simply, what was the event, what was the moment that someone noticed the problem that you're trying to solve. The pattern or trend, how has this happened over time? Is this the first time? Is this weekly? Is this monthly? Is it regular? Is it unpredictable? What are the sort of the trends or the patterns that go along with this event as this happens? Then a next question on that is to saying, what influences those patterns? What are the relationships between these different pieces? How are those things happening? Why are those patterns happening, perhaps? And then finally, at the base of that, we get to mental models. And mental models are, why are those patterns happening? Which really comes down to asking, what are the assumptions, beliefs, or values do people hold that are ultimately causing that event to happen? So in this way, it maybe doesn't make a ton of sense, so let's look at an example of what this might look like. So the event, the worker, you're a manager, and you've noticed that your worker is late. It's Tuesday, and they're late. Now that you start thinking about it, that worker's been late every single Tuesday. What's going on? Right? This is a problem. This shows a lack of respect. This shows a lack of commitment to work. This is setting a bad precedent for everyone else, right? There's lots of problems that could spiral out of this. But the underlying structure in terms of, late every Tuesday, why are they late every Tuesday? Well, because our company does not offer flex time. We have very strict policies about when you need to be here and when you need to start work. The school that your worker's child goes to also has very strict policies about when school starts and when they can be dropped off at school. And so maybe this person has childcare, every other day of the week. They split drop off with their spouse, and their parents do one day a week, but Tuesday is their day. And so there is drop off at the same time that they're supposed to be at work. So they're there 15 minutes, half an hour late every single time, right? Knowing this underlying structure might give you a very different perspective in terms of, what this problem is or what actually needs to be solved here, right? If we're just going to stop at worker is late every Tuesday, one more time and they are fired, right? But if we go down to underlying structures, maybe this isn't just the worker's fault. Maybe this isn't on them. Maybe there's something else here. But let's go even a step deeper and say, why don't we have flex time? Why do we have such strict policies? Well, ultimately, that's probably a lack of trust for our employees. That, face time is productive time, that you need to be in the office for a certain amount of time, and if your bum is not in your seat, well, then you're showing a lack of respect. So, can we change that? Can we change work culture? Do we want to change work culture, right? But it gives us a whole different perspective and a whole different context for that worker being late. Are they late, or is our system just antiquated in the way we think about when you need to be at work, not serving us anymore? I think this is another valuable way of being able to look at this and some other things to consider. So the words down the right-hand side on this now are quite valuable, right? So when we think about the events, well, we go back to our cold scenario, right? So what just happened? Well, I caught a cold. And so when we think about, well, I've got a cold, what can I do about that? I can only react, right? The only thing I can do is I'm already sick. I can stay home, I can take cold medication, I can drink tea, I can go to bed early. There's nothing else I can do, I'm already sick. But if we think about the patterns or trends that go along with that, interesting. I catch colds every time I'm sleeping less. Now I can start to anticipate. I haven't been sleeping very well for the last few nights. I'm going to get sick soon. I can, maybe preemptively, cancel some plans or something to try and deal with when I get sick. If we go down a little bit deeper and say, well, why do I keep sleeping less? Why does that keep happening? Well, that keeps happening because I have more stress at work. It was a crazy busy week. I left things to the last minute. I said yes to more things than I should have. And, I was overwhelmed. I didn't have time to get stuff done, so I was working late into the night. I didn't stop to eat proper food. I ate some fast food on the way home. My healthy habits just went out the window that week. Well, why do I keep doing that? Oh, actually, sorry, if we think about design then, then we can start to design things a little bit differently. I know next week is going to be a big week. I've got lots of deadlines. Maybe this weekend I need to spend extra time prepping meals, making sure I've got healthy meals in the freezer so I can pull them out every day and have something healthy to eat at the very least. Maybe there are things that I can do to offload. Maybe there is, different ways that I can design and plan my week to try and deal with this issue. But then if we go one layer further into those mental models, we can ask ourselves, why does that keep happening? Why am I doing this to myself? Why do I not eat, not sleep, stress out, and get sick? Well, because work really matters, right? Work is really important. I'm at this point in my career where it's the most important thing. I have to prove myself. If we asked, why do you leave things to the last minute? Well, maybe I'm a procrastinator, but maybe I'm kind of a perfectionist, right? I get worried, I get in my own way. I don't let myself get stuff done because I start judging it and then I just give up and walk away from it until suddenly I have a deadline and I have to do it at midnight or whatever it is. Right? And so those mental models now, if I start to identify and if I want to change this, then I can start to think about how I transform things, right? Is that true? Do I want work to be so important that I get sick and I don't sleep? Do I need to be this level of perfectionist, or could I just let that go a little bit? Do I need to go and talk to someone to try and transform my mental models about work so that I don't lose sleep and I don't get sick every time this happens? And so, again, really being able to get to the deeper levels of those. Now, I've got this, the AKA the 5 whys. This is another tool you'll hear about, and it goes along very well with the iceberg model, is to just keep asking those why questions, right? I'm sick. Why? Well, because I didn't sleep last week. Why? Well, because I had deadlines at work and I left things to the last minute and I had to stay up late and I didn't eat very well. Well, why? Well, because work is super important, I'm a perfectionist, I, am at this point in my career where this is just going to keep on happening. Right? So if you keep asking why, ultimately you're getting down to this root cause of what the heck is happening, why is that happening, and the greatest lever for making any change to those events that happen above it. So the iceberg or 5 whys is a great way to be able to get to that root cause. Now, because mental models are the least tangible, I find they're often the hardest to grasp to start with, right? They always feel a little bit like, well, how do you know what a mental model is? What does that actually look like? And so for that reason, it's kind of the greatest challenge to identify, but also that greatest opportunity to create some leverage and create some change. And so as this relates to systems thinking and systems theory, when people are looking at this, most people will agree that this is the greatest leverage point. It offers this, foundational driver in a system. Despite effort, despite money, despite resources, despite decades of trying to solve problems, sometimes they don't change. And that's probably because somewhere fundamentally the mental models are not allowing for change. So when we think about this, it's unlikely that you can create lasting or sustained change at the events, patterns, or structures level if you don't create change in the mental models level. And so again, how do you identify these things? Why are they so impactful? Well, because mental models tend to be those unspoken social norms. They're highly visible to and understood by the people most directly experiencing them. Right? We see this in so many different situations, right? When someone who is, a member of a minority community says there's racism here, and someone who's not part of that minority community says, no, there's not, you're just being overly sensitive, right? That's because of these types of mental models, right? These social norms. When you are the one who's experiencing it, it's that much more obvious to you. When someone who doesn't experience it, they won't see it as much. Less seen and questioned by people. And so really the way of being able to change this is thinking about changing the narrative, right? What is the narrative that goes along with different things? When people talk about racism or sexual assaults or things like that, how is it portrayed? The news reports, how we talk about it, how we introduce it, whose fault was it really? Those are our mental models. And it also can become so apparent in the ways that we assign meaning to different data or different information, right? So I think COVID was such an interesting example of this, is our mental models dictate what we thought about lockdowns and vaccines and things like that, right? Two people can both hear the news that, hey, there's a COVID vaccine and there is a COVID booster, right? The booster means for one person, fantastic, that's great news, it's working, I can keep myself safer with this vaccine by taking another one. For someone else, they hear there's a booster, which means, well, obviously the first one didn't work, and now they're trying to make up for it and fix it the second time around, right? The exact same piece of information, two people interpret in completely different ways. Trump is a really interesting example of this as well, right? Every time he gets charged with a new offense, there are some people who say, see, obviously he's a criminal. And there's other people who say, great, keep charging him. I think this is awesome. I want him in power anyways. I can't wait to vote him in office while he's sitting in a jail cell, right? Very different interpretations of the same piece of information. So it can be so impactful, but obviously so much harder to change as well. So we've started to work through this process. We've started to dive a little bit deeper. We've started to understand the problem, right? We're getting to the root cause. We know all of these different things now. We now know that I have unrealistic expectations of myself. I'm a perfectionist. I'm a procrastinator. I hold work above all other, aspects of my life right now. Are we done? Not really, no, because now we've got lots of problems, right? We've kind of done that discovery of coming up with lots of different problems and lots of different opportunities. We've got lots of root causes even. So now we need to come back and define that problem statement. And so what is the problem statement? Even this has important ways of being able to refine it. Problem statements are not all created equal. You need to have the right problem statement for the right situation. Because when you're trying to ultimately get to solving problems, the right problem statement is the only way you get there. It brings clarity, it brings focus, it allows you to prioritize what needs to happen. It acts a little bit like your North Star for your idea. And so a problem statement needs to be a clear, concise explanation of the problem you're trying to solve, and it can give you this clarity or focus around the problem. And as I mentioned, it also helps you to be able to prioritize what it is that you're working on, right? Is that related to our problem statement? Yes, good, do it. No, parking lot, right? There's only so many things you can focus on when you're working in a startup. Focus on what matters most. So what makes a good problem statement? You know, again, we can have the 5 W's. So what is the problem? Who is having the problem? Where does the problem occur? When does the problem occur? And why is it worth solving? That last one is always so interesting for me. You know, it sounds kind of cynical and it might sound flip, but think about the, so what? So what if this problem doesn't get solved, right? If you are trying to solve a problem, if you're trying to, get employees, you're trying to get investors, you're trying to, get some momentum around solving this problem, you need to convince people that this is a problem worth solving, right? Unfortunately, there are a lot of problems out there. So convince me, motivate me that this is one that is worth considering. So I've got a couple of tools in terms of thinking about how to develop problem statements. So this one being, thinking about your user, right? We're going back and we're putting your user right at the center. You're imagining you are them, or you're getting them to fill this out themselves, and just, simply filling in the blanks, give as a starting place. So I am a, who is this person? For whom are you solving? A brief description, a brief persona. What kind of person are they? Is it, really thinking about that early adopter piece? Who is most keen to have this problem solved? I'm trying to, what is it they're trying to do? What is the action? What are they trying to achieve? What is their goal that they are trying to accomplish? But something stands in their way, right? What is the challenge? What is the problem? Why is this difficult for them? Why isn't it working the way they want it to? Because this is the root cause, right? This is that problem. Because something stands in their way. The problem that is happening. Why is this, I'm trying to book a flight. So I am an avid, a new traveler. I'm trying to book a flight, but I can't, it's too expensive. I can't find the flight that I want because there's too many websites, there's too many options, there's too much information, it's too expensive, right? What is that challenge here? And this makes me feel, an opportunity for emotion, taking that perspective, gaining empathy, right? Going back to say, this makes me feel frustrated, annoyed, angry, sad, depressed, all of those different sort of things in terms of, what is it that they are going through to really make this about that user again. So some other things to try to avoid when you're developing problem statements. Again, thinking about that symptom instead of a root cause. And if you're not sure, ask yourself why. Why is that a problem? Why does that happen? Why does that happen? And why does that happen until you get to something that you feel like, oh, yeah, that's actually why all of those other things happen. So thinking about, this is an interesting way of thinking about it, something, why something is happening, not what is happening. What is the difference? What is happening there? It's also really easy to try and make a problem statement your solution. Being able to say, the problem is that we don't have this solution that I want, right? Or the problem is that we don't have this predetermined thing that I've already decided should be our solution. And I'll give some examples here in just a minute. Really making sure it only talks about the problem. And then a lack of clarity, right? Sometimes that seems obvious, but what might that mean? If you're trying to solve too many things at the same time, our problem is this and that and this and that, well then, it lacks clarity, it lacks focus. Trying to be specific and really trying to articulate the gap between the current and desired states, right? What is missing? What needs to change? Not what change do you want, but what needs to be changed. Oftentimes, This is another iterative thing, right? Just writing down a problem and moving on doesn't serve you when we're really, really trying to be focused on this problem statement, problem identification. So you're probably going to be iterating this. You're going to frame it and reframe it and keep asking and keep working through this process. So a couple of ways of being able to change what you're saying and how you're saying it. So start by writing out the problem statement. And actually, I'm just going to go to the next slide for this. So write out your problem statement. So in this case, we feel burdened by the maintenance of our products, right? Maintaining the products after we ship them is difficult. So reframe that as a how might we. This is such a design practice, a design principle that is embedded in so many different approaches. Reframing it into how might we changes it from an insurmountable problem to a problem with opportunity, right? Invites that creativity and invites the brainstorming that comes afterwards. So how might we maintain products during our everyday work? Then start to think about extreme words, right? This is all different ways of trying to craft this. This isn't necessarily a straight flow, but trying to think about what are other ways of being able to ask this. So introduce extreme words, eliminate, instant, flawless, perfect, right? Almost unattainable, but again, thought-provoking. How do we eliminate the need for maintenance? Then starting to think about emotions, again, bringing back that empathy piece, right? Pride, frustration, apathy, sadness. How could we become proud of the way that we are maintaining our products? How could we elicit joy in our customers because of our maintenance? Those sorts of things. Reframing them in bold or interesting or provocative sorts of ways. How might we create products that heal themselves? Right? Again, this isn't inviting an immediate solution. This is inviting that design thinking thought process to be able to understand this. And then similarly as before, avoid embedding that solution, right? How might we create an employee-led maintenance program? Well, the employee-led maintenance program is obviously the solution that you're trying to get to. You're asking a process question here, not a problem-solving question here. So we're not going to do that. And then also, avoiding, boring or uninspiring questions. How could we improve our approach to maintenance? Well, that's not very fun, right? Who's getting behind that? And so again, there it is. My animation's a little off. Those inspiring, provocative questions can really be quite effective. Again, these will be iterative, right? You can keep thinking about this, trying new combinations until your team feels confident in the wording. Thinking about what inspires you, what allows you to prioritize, what gives you that clear North Star to know what your next steps are be. What gives you an opportunity to say, if we do this, does that help us understand our problem, yes or no? And you will, and you should continue iterating this as you start to solve the problem. Right? So even just your word choice can have a big impact. I got to hear last year's Map the System UCalgary winners a few weeks ago, and they talked about, so their problem that they were looking at was the how few Canadians had a family doctor, essentially, right? And so the access to family doctors, or how many, so this was the important part, and Kurt, maybe you remember this piece too, but in terms of how few Canadians had a family doctor. They considered at one point the access to family doctors, the lack of access to family doctors. But that word access changed things so much because it brought in social, economic, background, new immigrants, all sorts of different questions, and it just became way too big. The access piece was completely different, and it changed the question. People have different access issues for all sorts of different reasons. And so this was the lack of available family doctors versus the access to family doctors. And so word choice can have a massive impact on what it is that you're actually solving. You might also find that as you start to look into this problem, there's way too much information, and it doesn't feel like it relates back to the problem that we're trying to solve. It feels like it's all unrelated. Well, then your problem statement is probably too broad. Whereas if you start to look into it, and you're like, there is nothing about this. There's no research, there's no people, there's nowhere to look to find any information about this. Well, you're probably too specific. We're always keeping that user in mind, right? We're always keeping our design principles with us as we go forward. And then the next question, and leading us into the third and final major bucket for the evening, is this, what is the nature of the system in which this problem exists? How do we understand it in context, right? Because there's our problem, there's the ecosystem, there's, small, medium, large size systems that this problem interacts with, exists within, and we need to be able to understand those as well. So when we start to think about those problems in context, right, we've thought about this problem statement, we've thought about really refining it and understanding it, going to actually look in the system then where these things exist, how they interact, then becomes a really important piece to be able to move forward and know how to start thinking about solutions, right? We haven't talked at all about starting on solutions yet because we're still not ready. We've got a problem statement, but it doesn't necessarily mean we really understand the problem itself. So I'm just going to see if I can switch here and show you an entertaining video as an introduction to systems thinking and why it matters. Hopefully this cooperates. Uh-oh. No sound. Why do we have no sound? We tested this. Sorry. Okay, let's try that.
In the 1950s, the Dayak people of Borneo, an island in Southeast Asia, were suffering from an outbreak of malaria, so they called the World Health Organization for help. The World Health Organization had a ready-made solution, which was to spray copious amounts of DDT around the island. With the application of DDT, the mosquitoes that carried the malaria were knocked down, and so was the malaria. There were some interesting side effects, though. The first was that the roofs of people's houses began to collapse on their heads. Turns out the DDT not only killed off the malaria-carrying mosquitoes, but it also killed a species of parasitic wasp that had controlled a population of thatch-eating caterpillars. Thatch being what the roofs of the Dayak people's homes were made from. Without the wasps, the caterpillars multiplied and flourished and began munching their way through the villagers' roofs. That was just the beginning. The DDT affected a lot of the island's other insects, which were eaten by the resident population of small lizards called geckos. The biological half-life of DDT is around 8 years, so animals like geckos do not metabolize it very fast. It stays in their system for a long time. Over time, the geckos began to accumulate pretty high levels of DDT, and while they tolerated the DDT fairly well, the island's resident cats, which dined on the geckos, did not. The cats ate the geckos, and the DDT contained geckos killed the cats. With the cats gone, the island's population of rats came out to play. We all know what happens when rats multiply and flourish. Pretty soon the Dayak people were back on the phone for the World Health Organization, only this time it wasn't malaria that was the problem. It was the plague and the destruction of their grain stores, both of which were caused by the overpopulation of rats. This time, though, the World Health Organization didn't have a ready-made solution and had to invent one. What did they do? They decided to parachute live cats into Borneo. Operation Cat Drop occurred courtesy of the Royal Air Force and eventually stabilized the situation.
If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe and consider.
So, a pretty great example of the importance of systems thinking and really what it means to think in systems, right? Is that piece at the end is that without understanding the system, solutions, interventions rarely cause the, linear outcomes that we think they will. And so it becomes really important to understand the system, right? Understand what is affected by and what affects the problem that you are looking at. So systems thinking is absolutely essential when it comes to seeing and talking about problems. It is, it's something that is exceptionally important just about everywhere, and I'm seeing it crop up in so many different ways. And so I think really, really important in that way. A framework for seeing connections and interrelationships rather than those isolated events, right? If we think about DDT or malaria by itself, yeah, we get rid of the mosquitoes and we get rid of the malaria. That's great. But there's so many examples of these unintended consequences that come as a result of the interconnectedness of systems. So by being able to make use of systems thinking, you have a deeper level of understanding of the system and really understanding, reflecting, respecting that relationship between those interacting components. And ultimately, like entrepreneurial thinking, it's a mindset and a skill set and approach to problem solving that really tries to help you understand, these broader pieces. And so, as we just saw, it works, it's necessary, because without understanding those interrelationships within a system, we can't fix things with scale or success. And now, while I don't know the scale or the types of problems that you're looking at, I teach a lot in social enterprise. And social enterprise is about solving massive social problems, the kinds of problems that no one entity could solve by themselves, right? No single organization is scaling to solve poverty. That takes so many organizations working on so many different aspects and approaches to poverty that they have to be able to work in that system together. And so broad systems thinking and systems change might ultimately change or reduce or maybe eradicate poverty, but no one organization is going to be able to do that. So being able to create that, 360 approach to solving problems is necessary and only possible with systems thinking. It also allows you to maybe increase your awareness how you might be contributing to the problems that you're trying to solve, right? What is your role? What are, there's feedback loops and systems that are keeping things stabilized and keeping things balanced. We see all sorts of examples of, food aid increases starvation. Because sending free rice to places that have just had a natural disaster is great for the first couple of weeks. But after that, it puts all of the local farmers and the local producers out of business. Now they're not producing their own food, and so next year, when that food aid has disappeared, there's no food left to be bought. There's no businesses left that's selling it. So understanding those sorts of connections. Being able to step back and understand the system gives you an understanding or an insight into potential leverage points, being where can you be able to, have a greater impact, an outsized impact versus the effort that you're putting in. You can't possibly understand a system without understanding the people in it, right? If I were to go and try to map any system by myself, I would do a terrible job of it. It would be incomplete and terribly biased. So the opportunity to be able to bring in those stakeholders, bring in the people who affect and are affected by that system in order to get stakeholders around the table, to understand, gain more empathy, have a full picture of the problem, the attempted solutions, things that are going on already. And again, maybe helps to anticipate and avoid those negative consequences. Sort of similarly, I've heard of, I worked with a student group many years ago who were working to develop smokeless cook stoves for people who rely on, cooking over fire. And the concern was that all of that smoke inhalation was causing lots of health issues. It was causing eye issues, heart issues, and there was a risk of, fires and burns and burning houses down and things like that. So they developed a smokeless cook stove to really try and tackle this problem. But it wasn't too long before they discovered that that smoke actually had a different purpose, which was keeping the mosquitoes away. And so now that there was no smoke, the population was starting to get malaria and dengue and all sorts of other mosquito-borne illnesses. So really, understanding it's not just about the smoke from that stove or the eye problems that it causes, but the other impacts that it has in that space. So very briefly, again, this is a topic that could and does take entire semesters to work through. But there are some tools out there that are great prompts and great things to be able to look at. So while you're trying to understand how your problem fits into the ecosystem, the Impact Gaps Canvas is a great tool. And it relates directly. It is the tool that is in the Map the System challenge that Hunter Hub also does. I use this tool in my classes. I teach it because it is so valuable to understand what is going on. And so the first piece is to dive really deeply into that problem, which we've talked a lot about already, but then it also forces you to look at existing solutions. What is already happening? What is already being tried? Because you don't want to duplicate those efforts. You don't want to necessarily compete with those efforts, depending on the nature of your problem, right? If maybe you can support, maybe there's a new way for you to be able to contribute. If you're looking at solving social problems, well, maybe a new venture is not necessarily the way to do it. Maybe there are tools out there or efforts that are already working that you could support. Understanding what roles and opportunities are out there and different ways to try and tackle this problem to make sure that before you start solutioning, you know where you fit in those existing opportunities. And then mapping, there's lots of different ways of being able to map in terms of thinking about, leverage points, looking for feedback loops, simply mapping all the stakeholders, right? All of the actors, who is in this system that we need to know about. You could map the journey of your user, your early adopter, right? What did they go through in terms of experiencing this problem, looking for a solution, considering the options, trying the options, and going through those different sort of pieces. Lots more of all of those as well, but again, just little tastes for this evening. If you wanted to start in terms of thinking about this, a great place to start is in what's called a cluster map. And simply, putting that problem or something related to it at the center of your page. And again, this is a literal and figurative way of keeping that problem at the center of what you're doing. And then you simply start to write down everything that is related, everything that is affected by or has an effect on this system or this problem, for better or worse. After that, you start to draw connections between them. It will get messy, right? You wrote them down because they're related. So things are going to be related all over the place, but ultimately you start to see that maybe there's some connections. Maybe there's something that is literally connected to everything else that you weren't expecting. Maybe that's a place to be able to dive in and understand more, start developing your solution. Then you can start to, iterate that, right? And map it again and put it in a different format or ask a different question. Maybe do it again with specifically who are the actors? Who are the people involved in this? Who else is in there? As in who's trying to solve it, who experiences the problem, who's affected by it, who has an effect on it. Where do you fit within that, right? Lots of different understanding those different kinds of groups that are in there. So that is, just again, sort of a brief journey through some fairly massive types of thinking and looking at that. So I think if I could boil it down to a couple of important things to be able to remember is to start with the user, continue with the user, end with the user in mind, right? They always need to be at the center of this. They are the ones for whom you are solving, so make sure it works for them. Take their perspective, gain empathy. Ask lots of questions, right? Have that curiosity. And getting good at asking questions is a practice in and of itself, right? And so lots of questions. And then you keep asking questions and you start asking why. You start embracing your preschooler and asking why do we do that? Then you start to understand some problems and you can frame it and you reframe it and you keep iterating. And then really ultimately, once you start to understand the part of this that you're trying to solve, you need to understand where you fit and what's already being done. What's already happening? What can you support? Who can you help? Whose help do you need? What is the best role for you to be able to play in this based on who you are, what you know, how you want to approach it, and things like that. So with that, I will say thank you and open the floor for any questions. Yes. Yeah. Great question. I would say yes. So question, if you didn't hear, is how do you know when you've got the problem to work on? And so being able to validate, yes, absolutely. And I would say that you would go and talk to customers. The next piece, and customers is quite broad. And so my inclination, my suggestion is to always try and figure out, once you've got that problem statement, who experiences it most acutely, right? You want to develop a ridiculously specific early adopter description. This isn't the customer. This isn't everyone that will ever consider it. This is the people who have the problem, know they have the problem, want a solution, have tried other things out there and are frustrated by it, right? And so trying to figure out, who are those people? What sort of, actions do they take? Where will you find them? What are they experiencing? And really try to understand that persona so you can go and make sure you talk to the right people, right? Because you don't want to ask someone who, it's not really a problem for me. Nah, I'm good, right? Because they're not going to give you great feedback. But when you can find the person who's like, oh my goodness, yes, I struggle, I suffer from this, I want something so badly, the perspective that they can give you is going to be a lot more valuable. And so yes, I think it's that research piece in terms of talking to people. There could be secondary research in terms of trying to look in the marketplace, do some Googles, look at Reddit. Is this something that people are complaining about there? But yes, ultimately I think trying to talk to people and make sure that they do have the problem. Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah. Yeah, great question. And to be honest, it's something that I myself am working on because I'm aware that this I'm a victim of it as well. There are so many sort of simple practices that you can do. I mean, even just, engaging the right side of your brain now and then, right? Build some time into your day to do some drawing, to do some coloring. There's some simple exercises that you can do. There's one called the 30 circles. And so it's literally 30 circles on a piece of paper. Grab that, give yourself a 3-minute timer, and start to turn as many of those circles into identifiable objects as possible, right? And you just go for it. And it's, there's going to be a pizza and a clock and a soccer ball and a planet and all of those different sort of things, right? And just practicing that and coming up with lots of different things. I often do sort of icebreakers in my class where the first couple of minutes is trying to do things like this. So another exercise that we do is I tell everyone to write down 3 things that you can't possibly do with a coat hanger. So they write that down, then they pass their piece of paper to another group, and that group's job is to figure out a way to do those 3 things, right? And just kind of practice that divergent thinking a little bit. Hang out with 5-year-olds is a great way of being able to do this. Just in terms of, what they come up with is remarkable. My son will pick up a stick, and the stick will be a sword. It'll be a wand. It'll be a jetpack. It'll be his, his invisibility cloak activator. It will be, he comes up with 7 different things. So even that, right? Like pick up something random and just think about, what are all the weird different things that this could be. And it feels uncomfortable and awkward to start with, but it is a practice and it is a skill set. And then there's just one other thing I was thinking of. I think, and it is just in that, trying to let yourself be a little bit curious, there's so many things that I think we eventually take for granted, right? It's just a part of our day. And it's not there's lots of things that maybe aren't necessarily that bad, maybe it's not really a problem, but just start to like try to practice asking questions. Why does it happen? You know, why do we do that? Why do we drive on the right side of the road? Why are stop signs red? You know, just try to look around and say, you know, why does that happen? And it's just once you start kind of priming your brain for it, it's a valuable thing. And then there is, I actually haven't read it yet, but I hear really good things about it. There's a book called The Extended Mind, I think it is. Thinking outside your own brain, and it really is about that sort of creativity. So there's lots of books and activities and things out there as well. Yeah. Yes. Oh, that's a really interesting question. So when you have timelines, right, that there are sometimes you just have to get stuff done, you have to move on, you have to meet deadlines. But as you work through that process, you discover there's more and more. You know what, to be perfectly honest, I don't know if I have an answer. It is something that I struggle with. And I think in particular when we talk about, you know, social enterprise and things like that, solving social problems, I find this to be such a massive tension in that, is because on the one hand, I want stuff to be solved, right? I want things to change. I want, you know, there not to be poverty and not to be homelessness and not to be racism and not to be sexism, and I want to see those things changed now. But, you know, at the same time, there's such massive histories and mental models and, you know, legitimacies that are, you know, keeping those, maybe illegitimate legitimacies, histories of legitimacy that are keeping those things in place. And so it's something that I guess I don't quite know. And I think that really, though, it's one of those things where you know, do what you know until you know better. Right, is so that if you have to deliver on something, do the best you can, right? So deliver on it for now, but keep learning and keep iterating and keep getting better so that, you know, on the next iteration or the next time around, you can improve on things. I think that is actually an interesting question after the creativity piece, because I think that we also have this massive fear of failure, right? We have a massive fear of doing it wrong or not getting it all the way right or not being perfect. But that is a really impossible bar to set for ourselves in so many ways. And sometimes we just have to try, right? And so I have worked for companies, and I think that's really that entrepreneurial mindset, right? Is to say, this is what we know for now, let's do it, and we'll figure it out and do it better the next time as we learn things. I've worked for some companies that have been so ridiculously entrepreneurial. It's just like, we don't know, just do it, right? We're just going for it. We're just gonna try it, and we're gonna send it out there, and we're gonna see what happens. And sometimes it blew up. Sometimes it was a massive disaster. But because we were in an environment that said, we know we're trying things, we know we're gonna fail, let's just learn from them. And so I think that that is a really important piece, is that when you're working on something that is iterative and maybe isn't going to ever be finished, is to make sure you're in an environment that recognizes that and can support it as much as possible. I don't know if that's really an answer, but yes. Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think that's true, right? Is that sometimes this, and I think that that is, you know, where the really getting comfortable and understanding the problem is not something that business tends to be very good at, right? We really want to get to solutions. We want to get there now. We want to get it into the marketplace. We need to be first, and we need to start making money on it. So I think those timelines are predominant or dominate in a lot of ways. And so I think hopefully in that entrepreneurial startup sort of environment, there will be people who say, let's do it the best for now and keep working at the same time. And so if that's, you know, maybe trying to find investors that align with that recognize that we're going to try and then we're going to keep on trying. Yeah.
How have you managed switching between entrepreneurial thinking or like entrepreneurial venture or something like that and managerial thinking for a day job? Have you found those
Oh, no, I wouldn't say that they've detracted. I think that, as I try to develop and practice, my own entrepreneurial thinking more and more, I think that it is, I think I'm getting better and better in that. And I wouldn't say that I'm getting worse at managerial. And in fact, I think that there's ways that they complement each other quite well. I think that it is the kind of thing that, they're often used for sort of different reasons, right? Is that when you're trying to invent something, then the entrepreneurial thinking skill sets need to be able to kick in, and you can start there. When you are trying to, kind of do something we kind of already know how to do, just the tools and the processes are going to lean a little bit more towards that managerial thinking side of things. Except that, if we're trying to do something managerial but kind of new, right? There's opportunities, and I think there's creativity. And so I think that I don't feel like it's a conscious thought necessarily. I think though I have people on either side of me, right? I have people who are far more entrepreneurial. And so I recognize that in them when we're in this like really creative sort of process or part of a process. I'm like, wow, you're really good at that. And, I have maybe a little bit more of the managerial in that circumstance. But then I'm in other situations where people are very managerial, and I'm the one who's like coming up with sort of the crazy ideas. And so I think that it's kind of all relevant or all relative, sorry. It's been a long day. There's a question in the back. Sorry, what was the?
How can someone organize the ideas that they come up with? Just I come up with a lot of ideas, but I don't know what to pursue. What would be so very
Yeah, cool. So lots of problems, don't know which one to pursue or how to. Okay, yes, absolutely. So it sounds like the question is for someone who has lots of ideas and lots of potential initiatives, how do you determine which one to come up with? Or how do you determine which one to pursue? So I think, that's a great question. I think it's a wonderful problem to have to start with. So that's a great thing, right? In terms of that keeping a bug log that I suggested to people at the beginning, you're obviously doing that. You've got these, thought processes. You've got things that are percolating ideas all the time. I think that, as they become ideas, kind of working through this process and understanding what is the problem. Why is it worth solving? Is it worth solving? Who experiences it? Do I know those people? Do I have the skills, or do I know the skills or the people who have the skills that would help me to be able to solve that problem? What is needed most? I think there's sort of the Japanese term of ikigai, and I can't remember what the 4 things are, but it's like, what are the things that I want to do? What are the things that I'm good at? What are the things that the world needs? And where do those things overlap, right? Because you're right, there's lots of ideas that might never go anywhere. There's lots of ideas that might be better suited for someone else to do. But just, I think, when you come up with something, if there's something that really, makes you excited about it, makes you go, oh, this is cool, this is an opportunity, go with it, right? But in that sort of failing forward mindset to say, I'm going to try this for as long as I can. And I'm going to push at it to get it as far as I can. And if eventually it fails, well, then I've got other ideas to fall back on. If it goes and goes and goes, well, I'll stick with it for, as long as it needs me to stick with it. And so I think, that, as I say, trying to kind of figure out, what is interesting, exciting for you? What are you passionate about? What do you want to solve? What do you have the skills to solve? And where do those things overlap? What does the world need? And how do you provide that? Yeah, absolutely. Yes. Hi, Darylyn.
I think something really important is there's a massive myth, which is build it and they will come. Could you just link that to what you were talking about today?
Oh, interesting. Yeah, so question being a myth around build it and they will come. I think that is just a different way of saying I have a solution and I hope people want it. It is a way of being able to, just focus on, commit to the solution itself rather than really understanding and committing to a problem. And I think that I guess I don't entirely know where it comes from. Maybe there are examples where it's true, but I think underlying the examples where they are successful, there was a problem that needed to be solved. In the build it and they will come, and then there's ultimately crickets, there was a lack of design thinking. There was a lack of empathizing for the users. There was a lack of understanding for what the problem actually was and who experienced it and how they wanted it solved. Those are all very different sort of questions. You need to have a problem, you need to have a customer, and you need to have a solution that solves that problem for that customer, right? It can't just be 3 random pieces. And so they absolutely need to overlap. And I think that takes really deliberate work and intention and homework and research in order to actually make sure that will happen. Because when it doesn't, you can spend there's so many famous examples of entrepreneurial failures, and it's not to say that every single one of them didn't have a problem, but if they didn't have a problem, it's far more likely that I think you're ultimately going to fail and sit there with whatever it is that you've built and no one ends up coming. Is that kind of what you're getting at?
I think the answer, I know that's a big thing for people, they just don't understand
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think it's a there and there's places that's true, but I think in the world of entrepreneurship and startup and solving, trying to create value in the world, I think there's a big step being missed for sure. Yeah.
So another question just is with respect to users and what you're building. So a lot of companies follow this idea of most companies do, which is customer first, right? So building for that. But at what point, I guess, how do you measure which user suggestions or customer suggestions actually value? And is there ever a case where customer suggestions or user suggestions, et cetera, just like system thinking, you're saying that solutions can be to unwanted responses?
Yeah, totally. So the question being, how do you know which customers to listen to? Is it ever a case where a customer can, give you a suggestion that ultimately is the wrong one? And I think that absolutely. I think that that's a really good point, is that when you go out to gather feedback, you want to gather really, really a lot of feedback. But the thing about feedback is that everyone has their own perspective, and you're going to get a lot of diversity of opinions. You're going to get different opinions from customers, you're going to get different opinions from advisors, from investors. There's going to be a lot of people who say, yes, love it, we should do this, or no, you absolutely have to change this about it. And I think that I don't know that there is a fail-safe way of knowing which feedback to follow and which to disregard. But I think that ultimately it is coming back to, understanding, why is that person giving you that feedback? If it's a customer who says, no, that's not the feature that I'd want, is it because they don't actually experience the problem? Or is it because they're really, genuinely giving you valuable feedback on that and really trying to understand their why? Why are they telling you that? Why is that their perspective? If you have an investor or an advisor who says, no, that's a terrible idea, you shouldn't do it, do they just not understand it? Do they not get it? And I think ultimately having some conviction, right, really understanding and surrounding yourself with people whose opinions you really value and respect. They know you, they know what you're trying to achieve, they understand your why and your values, and so they can help you with a gut check, right? You can go and say, hey, I heard this, what do you think? And I know there is an amount of luck involved with success in startup, and so it's not that you will always be guaranteed to get exactly the right feedback at exactly the right time, but I think that the more you get, the more you can kind of understand the bell curve, right? There's going to be outliers, and maybe those are worth disregarding, or maybe that takes you in a whole new super creative direction. But I think it's the more you have, the more you can kind of understand the trends and try to understand the why behind why people are giving you that feedback. You're welcome. I feel like we might be getting close to time. Is that true? Can I do one more? One more? Okay, absolutely. Connections and networking to be beneficial for entrepreneurs. Absolutely. So one of the things about, one of my very first slides was around the entrepreneurial thinking process. So I'll just go back to that for a second. And so when we think about entrepreneurial thinking, it starts with extant means, these available resources. So when you start to solve problems, you draw back to, what do you know? What skills do you have? Who do you know? Those are what allow you to be creative and come up with those multiple different solutions. So the more people you know, the more people you can draw on to say, hey, I know someone who has these skills. I know someone who has those skills. Not everyone you meet is going to be able to be super helpful necessarily, but I think that, having more people that you know that you can get feedback from, you can get advice from, you can draw on for help or support, I think it's absolutely valuable. Yeah, for sure. Cool. Thank you very much, everyone. What you had in mind? Yeah, exactly. Fabulous.
Okay, thank you everyone. We will see you next week on Tuesday for the workshop.